Welcome everybody. We'll get going in just a minute here. Just getting folks into the room.
I feel like it's our version of Ice Fest because we haven't all hung out together in so long. So
I know.
it's like, oh my God, all these people I haven't seen in a year. It's amazing.
Exactly.
Hey,
Super fun.
so glad to see you.
I increased the number of squares my Zoom would hold, and now there's like lots of really little people.
Yeah.
Oh wow. I don't know how to do that.
It was under preferences. You can go up to like 48.
Oh wow.
I don't know if I recommend it. It's weird.
Yeah, a little hard to keep track of.
Nice to see everyone.
Oh, I see. There's Mark. Mark, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Here I am.
Great.
Hi,
Hey,
everybody.
Hey, Mark.
Hi, Janet. Hi, Micah. Hi,
Hey,
Sarah.
hey.
Hi, Mike. Hi,
Hi.
Meg.
Hi, good to see you.
All right. Ready to kick some ass here? I got a delicious beverage to help.
Oh
me.
yeah, me too.
That's good. I got one too.
Hey, Bayard.
Hey, how are you, Mark?
Good. Long time no see. Where
Man,
you
it's
been?
been ages. I was just thinking about you the other day. It's been too long.
Yeah, I know it.
Where are you right now, Mark?
I'm in at Mallard Lane,
Oh,
Silver
good.
Lake.
Good. I like that.
Yeah, I've been up here a lot. It's been nice.
Oh, that's a great spot, man.
We'll get going in a couple minutes, just letting people filter in.
I'm afraid, Mike, I was late. Sorry, I was just getting back to my house. Is there anything that I need to know that I don't know?
I don't think so. We just wanted to make sure that everybody was able to log in and be heard.
Did you get the email from me?
I did. Yep. I
Okay, good.
responded. I don't know if you saw that, but
I didn't for
Oh,
some
yeah.
reason. Maybe it got spammed or something.
I don't
That's
know.
funny. Yeah, that is weird.
It was so one thing I can already tell.
Oh,
with
I
so-
got it. I'm sorry. Yeah.
With so many people, Mike. So Trina's asking to unmute, so I'll unmute her. But then you lose them in the list, the people.
okay. We'll just ask people to mute themselves after they're done talking.
Okay.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah, just be cool.
Tried to unmute you, Trina. Did that work? Let's see. Let's somebody else try to. I don't think I can unmute people, Mike. Can any other individuals unmute themselves?
I'm unmuted.
People that are co-hosts, let me see. I'll ask Ray Rice here to see if he'll unmute himself.
Don't do that.
I agree. That's
Why
dangerous.
did you go to Ray?
Yeah.
That's dangerous.
There we go.
And then you can't unmute, like it's a weird loop.
Oh, there we got you.
You got me?
We got Trina Doran here.
Do you have me?
Yeah.
Sarah Rice.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes.
him.
All right.
Is that
All right.
Michael Larson there?
Ray Rice.
All right.
All right.
Hey, Ray.
I'm gonna
Michael
rename
Larson there? I can't tell in the little picture.
renaming it to you. Rename.
Oh, so these are So we're looking at all the people that are just actually on the forum, not necessarily the panel. Is that right, Mike?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, this is just a typical Zoom
I was gonna say, this is a pretty good sized panel.
We'll be here all night, Mark.
Yeah. Till Frank comes up.
You gotta wait your turn.
Yeah, we didn't go with the webinar format. We went and just kind of the full on meeting.
So Mike, when you're ready to get going, I can keep entering, allowing people to jump, getting them out of the waiting room.
All right,
Yeah.
cool. I will jump on in then. All right, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for coming tonight to the Winter Climbing Forum that's been put together by Friends of the Ledges. Just some quick Zoom etiquette and navigation, and then a little other housekeeping. Because we have such a big group and we're working in this kind of general meeting platform, we are having everybody muted as they come in. If you, in the process of the conversation tonight, have a question or a comment you want to make verbally, you can raise your hand. And with so many people in the room, it's going to be really important that you use the hand raise function on the Zoom platform. And depending on the version of Zoom you're using, it may either be over in your participant panel on the right, but more than likely it's in the reactions down on the bottom toolbar of the Zoom window. There's a reactions button, and you'll see raise hand. And that will actually make you come up on the queue on the side of the screen here that we'll be able to see, as well as on the screen. So definitely recommend that. You can also drop questions into the chat. Sarah is going to be, or Meg is going to be monitoring the chat. So as we get questions, we'll start populating those, and we'll make sure that we'll do our best to get to all the questions and comments that get posed. In terms of some just ground rules, this is a community discussion. A lot of us know each other, but some of us don't. Let's make sure we're being respectful of everybody's opinions. We're not gonna solve anything tonight. Probably we're just kind of here to share ideas and thoughts, really start the conversation. And really the name of the game tonight is just be respectful, be listening. Feel free to share your ideas, but let's try to avoid any sort of negativity if we can, as much as possible. The event is being recorded so that we can, this is a pretty interesting coming together of folks, and it will help us kind of encapsulate what's been shared here tonight. Sarah Garlick has been kind enough to offer to kind of come up with a summary following tonight's conversation. So yeah, that's happening. Quick overview of the evening. To kick things off, we're going to hear from Sarah Garlick, Friends of the Ledges president. Then Sarah will kick it back to me for some opening thoughts and introductions of the panelists. Then following that, Bayard Russell will provide a brief overview of winter climbing in the region, presented from his perspective as someone who has pursued thin lines, fat flows, and scratchy ascents over the past 20 years. And from there, we'll dive into questions with the broader panel. I'll be posing some questions to kick things off, but our goal for the evening is to provide you all with an opportunity to present questions, comments for community consideration, and for our panelists to respond to and react to. Friends of the Ledges, as I mentioned, will be releasing a written report summarizing tonight's discussion, and they will be keeping the comment form that they have on their website open so that folks can weigh in following tonight's conversation to continue continue sharing thoughts. If you're interested in what people have said to this point through the comment form they have available, I'm going to drop a public link to what's been shared on a Google Doc into the chat right now. So you should be able to access that. If you can't, well, let us know, and we'll try to remedy that. And I want to just acknowledge both Sarah Garlick and Meg Hoffer, who have both been working on this this evening's panel discussion. Meg's been doing a lot of emailing and promotion for this, and then Sarah, as president of Friends of the Ledges, has been, really a spearhead of getting this off the ground. So I want to thank you all for coming tonight. Looking forward to a great conversation. I'll be moderating this evening. I should have introduced myself, I suppose. My name is Mike Morin. I'm the Northeast Regional Director for the Access Fund, based here in Glen, New Hampshire. So with that, I will turn it over to Sarah.
Thanks, Mike. Hi, everyone. It's really nice to see you all here. I know I speak probably for everyone wishing that we were in person at IME or Tuckerman Brewing or wherever, so it's, but at least we'll do our best with the technology that we have. I'm going to throw in the chat a link to the statement that the Friends of the Ledges crafted to sort of just spur this conversation, as well as a link to the form that Mike was mentioning, in a list of some folks who have been helping out in crafting both that initial statement and the plans for tonight. So I just want to thank everyone, and especially thank Mike and the Access Fund for stepping into this role. So Friends of the Ledges, we're a volunteer organization dedicated to the stewardship of local climbing areas and preserving the tradition of climbing in the Eastern White Mountains of New Hampshire and Maine. So we tend to think of the area in Jerry Handra's guidebook as sort of our service area. As an organization, the Friends is focused on really two priorities. So the first is access, and that's working a lot behind the scenes with landowners and land managers to advocate for climbers, and to really get ahead of any issues before they arise. We want to be proactive with our access. And then our second priority as an organization is stewardship. So that's replacing aging bolts, working on trail projects, and just being there to pitch in to help. So when the kiosk at Cathedral needs a facelift, when there's graffiti on a boulder, when there's trash in the woods, that's the role that the Friends of the Ledges aims to play in our community. We are not a governing body. We don't make rules about climbing or establish ethics, but we do hope to facilitate conversations about ethics and practices within our community when we need to, like we are tonight. So thank you all for coming. Friends of the Ledges would love your involvement in the organization. It is evolving and changing and growing. So the best way to get involved is to make sure you're on our email list. And again, I'll put a link in the chat to the nhledges.org page where you can just make sure you're signed up. You can come to our stewardship events. We typically do a cliff cleanup and like trail, blowing the leaves off the trails at the end of May, early June at Cathedral and Whitehorse. We'll have some volunteer opportunities this summer with the White Mountain Trail Collective and the Access Fund at Whitehorse, doing some trail erosion work at below Echo Roof. And then I'm excited this spring, people will be able to get involved more with Friends of the Ledges as members. So we're working with a new membership structure with the Access Fund. And I think that'll be a really fun way for people to get engaged with the mission and the work, and feel more connected is what we're hoping for. So I'll send an announcement about the membership option when it comes out, probably the next month or so. So with that kind of intro, I'm happy to launch into our program. Tonight, we've intentionally chosen to dig into a detailed conversation about winter climbing in the Eastern White Mountains, and we've invited a group of expert practitioners here to help us guide through that conversation. But I want to acknowledge just right off the back at the beginning that these are not the only relevant perspectives. The Eastern White Mountains are the ancestral homelands of the Abenaki people, both past and present, and the history of these lands and the people who have inhabited them. I think it's fascinating and important, and I invite all climbers to learn more about this broader context of the places we all hold dear in our hearts. So I've learned a lot personally from the Indigenous New Hampshire Collaborative Collective, and I'll put again, when I finish talking, I can't walk and chew gum, put a link to their resources in the chat, and it's really worth checking them out. And I think we should consider other user groups and other folks as well, like the wishes and concerns of local neighbors, and the land managers who ultimately decide what flies or not. And I think we probably have a few land managers on the call tonight. If they're here, I hope they'll speak up. I will say that in the conversations I've had with folks from the New Hampshire State Parks and the White Mountain National Forest, what I've heard so far is really strong support for the climbing community as a user group coming together to internally manage our own kind of nuanced issues. And that's what we're hoping to at least start to do today. So we don't have any illusions of coming to like grand consensus with 100 people on a Zoom call, but really being able to share our different ideas and perspectives is the goal tonight. And again, thank you all for coming. Mike, back to you.
All right, great. Thanks, Sarah. So right out of the gates here, I just want to acknowledge that just note that I'm moderating tonight. I live locally, so I definitely have opinions on this topic, but my goal tonight is to be an impartial moderator, really to help make sure that everybody gets to share their perspective and hopefully draw unique and interesting thoughts from our panelists. So in that light, I have a little bit of kind of opening remarks to make, and then I'll introduce the panelists and we'll get right into it. So the White Mountains have a long history of providing climbers with opportunities to explore and grow as all-around climbers. The accessible, varied terrain and conditions we are fortunate to have in the region only exist in a few other areas in the US. What we have here is truly unique. This uniqueness is important to consider as we embark on tonight's discussion. We must think through the big picture, taking into account the consequences of unmitigated impacts, while also considering if scratched rock, an altered hold, or a divot becoming a pocket is acceptable in light of our unique environment and climbing history. As with all big issues humanity has grappled with, there is no perfect solution in this comparably small but important topic we have queued up this evening for our community. All we can do is our best to hear one another, think critically, and agree to move forward with a solution-based mindset, remembering that regardless of the path chosen, someone will experience a loss of opportunity. It's not the intent of this evening's discussion to come away with a set of rules or concrete solutions. Rather, the next couple of hours should be viewed as an opportunity to share ideas and perspectives that will hopefully help inform individual decision-making in the short term, and perhaps eventually, through further discussion, lead us to a point of community consensus that will provide for access to diverse and high quality opportunities that are a defining part of being a climber in the White Mountains, while protecting our precious resources. So with that said, it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's panelists. A few short introductions here. We have Janet Wilkinson with us tonight. Janet has been living, working, and recreating in the Mount Washington Valley for nearly 20 years. And trends strongly to the rock climber end of the year-round vertical sports spectrum. She says issues of sustainability, transparency, and fairness have been most on her mind while thinking about our conversation tonight. She also says she apologizes in advance if her kids make cameos in the Zoom screen at some point. All bets are off during the evening witching hours. Next, we have Mark Richey. Mark has been climbing in the White Mountains since 1973 and continues to climb regularly throughout the region. Mark served as president of the American Alpine Club from 2002 to 2004 and spent 6 years on the council of the UIAA, where they worked regularly on the challenges of climber impacts and conservation of our wild places. Like many, Mark is concerned about the impacts that the increasing number of climbers in the US are having on our crags, but is happy to see so many people discovering climbing in the outdoors and finding joy in it as he has. He is hopeful that we can use the growth of climbing to better educate and manage our climbing community, and also bring a stronger voice to our lawmakers and government officials on the larger issue of protecting and conserving these places we all care about. Next up, we have Majka Burhardt. Majka is a professional climber and conservation entrepreneur, author, mother of twins, and filmmaker. She's climbed and led expeditions around the world and has been climbing ice and mixed routes here in New England since 2008. She's also an AMGA certified rock guide, ice instructor, and founder of Legato, where she works to protect the world's hyper biodiverse mountains by partnering with the people who call them home. Next up, we have Zach St. Jules. Zach was born and raised in Canada and spent time moving up and down the East Coast before settling in New Hampshire about 10 years ago with his wife, where they are now raising 3 sons. Zach began climbing shortly after moving to New Hampshire, got inspired by the amazing winter climbers in the region, and began pursuing the craft. Zach uses the lessons he's learned from climbing in his day-to-day life and is always psyched to learn new lessons from his winter climbing pursuits each winter. And finally, we have Bayard Russell. Bayard has been living, working, and climbing in the White Mountains since 2001. Winter climbing has been a source of adventure and friendship for him throughout. He is currently working on an updated version of the ice climbing guidebook for the region, is the founder of the Cathedral Mountain Guides, and has done many first ascents in the White Mountains and surrounding areas. He runs a small residential building company and is the father of 2 wild little boys who he and his wife hope to have plenty of winter adventures with one day. So clearly we have a great group of folks with us tonight, lots of perspectives, lots of experience, and I'm excited to get into the conversation with them. To kick things off, we're gonna hand it over to Bayard, who's gonna give us a little presentation on climbing in the winter climbing in the White Mountains.
All right, thanks, guys. Should be an interesting evening. I'm just gonna go ahead and share my screen here and show you some pictures as I talk about, just one sec here. As I talk a little bit about the past maybe 20 years in there we go, in the local area. How does that look? Can you guys see a picture there?
Looks good, Bayard.
All right, great. Ooh, we're having a technical difficulty here. I apologize. Give me a sec here. We had this worked out a minute ago. I've done a few presentations in person, but never in on a Zoom call here. Hold on for just a sec, okay?
Yeah, no hurry.
Cool. All right. Bam. Share screen. Okay. Bam. There we go. How's that looking? Can you guys see my screen now?
Looks good, Bayard. We got
You're
you.
good.
All right, cool. Sorry about that. I'm gonna jump right into it here. There's a quiet little history of climbing at Cathedral Ledge. I just wanted to give a little background that hopefully bridges the gap between the straight shafted ice climbers that I started climbing amongst and the more brightly colored climbers of today. Hold on here. Oh my goodness. I can't advance the slide, unfortunately. If I was able to before. I apologize, guys.
Byron, you could also email me your file and I could share if you want.
Yeah, okay. Boy. Just one sec here.
Yeah, take your time.
I apologize, guys.
That works.
Okay.
Just click through that way.
Yeah, that's great, Bayard.
All right, cool. There we go. I just had the wrong, anyway, whatever. Back to it. We got it fixed. My apologies. Next slide. That's Kevin Mahoney right there. More traffic creates more impact for sure, but that's not just the fault of the greater number of people out there today. Mixed climbing in Cathedral evolved from with a very small group of people who set precedents along the way, and for the most part, just kept to themselves about what exactly they were up to. Routes that have been put up at Cathedral in the past 20 years are pretty much universally stellar, but more broadly, the standards in winter climbing has risen like a tide. Routes that 10 years ago saw very little traffic are now being climbed with regularity. I happened into a great little time slot to be psyched on mixed climbing, starting for me in about 2001, 2002. It had already been happening around here in the Whites and as a modern form for years, but in very few areas. And the sport was already very developed out west in places like Canadian Rockies and Europe. We didn't really have to invent anything. We just needed to find terrain, which was actually pretty easy to do because aside from Trollville, right off the road in Jackson, you could pretty much walk up to any hanging icicle in the White Mountains and bet that it hadn't been climbed yet. Prior to this period, people generally climbed rock and mountain boots and gloves, aid climb when that made sense, and saved the sharp stuff for the ice. Crazy, right? Climbers would wait to climb a route like Diagonal or Cathedral Direct until the ice was fat, the cliff was mostly free of snow, and then leave the rock sectors in mountain boots. Also, the idea of free climbing in the winter was slower to catch on than with rock climbing. Well, that's our picture for a little while, apparently. Winter mixed climbing is still approached even now as an alpine training exercise as much as its own pursuit. Peter Lewis and Rick Wilcox's 2002 guidebook had a few new mixed routes in it, mostly trad routes that involve dry chilling. These basically fell into two categories completely: new routes and old routes climbed in a modern style, like Doug Madera and Steve Larson's 2002 winter free ascent of Deidre on Cathedral Ledge. Even years after the book was published, winter ascents of routes other than a couple of the classics like Goofers and Repentance were so infrequent as to be almost random. Until very recently, you would hardly ever see anybody even on remission. At Cathedral, folks could pretty much do whatever they wanted, and good new routes started getting done when the conditions allowed. These new routes all had substantial sections of ice. It's important to point out that routes like Jack on Ice, the winter version of Jack the Ripper, and the intimidating bicycle ride, which flows over part of Intimidation, were ice climbs. That could easily get lost to history. When Peter Doucette and Dan Korn did the intimidating bicycle ride, it was probably 95% ice and incredible. That same week, when Doug Madera did Jack on Ice, it was totally iced out, zero dry chilling. Deidre, probably the most controversial and popular of these routes, is almost entirely an ice climb. When it's not fat, for example, there isn't a single move without ice right up through the top of the Birch Tree Corner, which is about 50 meters up the cliff. It's all ice. That's rare, but that's when this thing is truly in. To climb the ice on cryokinesis, which recently got a rare ascent and some press as well, you don't even have to touch the gorgeous 510 corner of the Kinesis rock climb. A filthy moss-covered variation out left was used to get there instead. The dry finish up there is new winter climbing terrain, but also, as it turns out, some really good 511 rock climbing. So we'll see what happens with that. So when I say that we just did whatever we wanted, it was actually fairly limited, and there were really only about a dozen people involved at the time, 5, 10, 15 years ago. What we were doing it just seemed so out there and silly that it wasn't ever going to catch on. Also, a lot of winter mixed climbing is committing, so it's the lack of good gear that usually turns you around, not the moves. Learning that control seemed like it would be a real deal breaker for a lot of folks. Time has gone on, and I guess I was wrong about that. The sport is definitely more popular, and that has left its mark on the shared resource, but the path to get us here was nothing more than a series of folks losing sleep with excitement over individual projects on individual days off. 5 to 10 years ago even, no one else really knew what was going on and no one else really seemed to care. Mostly, I just remember coming home after a really cool day out, maybe being reminded to take the trash out and then getting back to regular life like we all do. That very specific history was never known outside of a small group of people and never really shared. In hindsight, the fact that these climbs existed as winter routes probably looked more like an invitation. You know, so-and-so route is good for dry tooling. It's been done however many years ago. So here we are, that sort of Wild West-like time period is over and we're realizing that we've got an issue. So it's a great conversation to have now. And like many things in life, we arrived at this point without intention. It was just a series of folks out climbing on their day off year after year at an incredible venue. But that venue is loved all year long. Anyway, I hope this sheds a little light on how we came to where we are now. I think that Friends of the Legend is handling this in a very good way. Their statement on the issue, I thought, was very balanced and in the New Hampshire tradition, left plenty of room for individuals to make their own calls. No one, especially climbers, like being told what to do. But it is my hope that understanding that the free-for-all period just before the sport's current popularity was a bit more under control than you might have thought. There was thought put into protecting the rock climbs even then, and I'm hopeful that this evening will help with that same consideration in the future. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks for that, Bayard.
Yeah, I'm sorry that I lost some of those pictures there. It sort of froze up on me, but I figured I'd just keep going.
No, that's great. I
Yeah.
appreciate it. I do have one question queued up for you, and then we're going to roll into the broader panel.
Please.
You know, as it was mentioned, you're, you know, you mentioned both Rick and Peter Lewis's guidebook, and you know, you've been working on a revision of that. So I wanted to, in light of that, and thinking about, you know, there's a lot of summer rock climbs mentioned in that old Peter Lewis and Rick Wilcox guide. And so I was kind of curious, you know, routes such as Sliding Board, Upper Refuge Thin Air have all been documented in winter ascents and are listed as mixed climbs. Do you think these routes and others like them should still be included in winter climbing guides for the region? If they are, should the inclusion of guidance around when it's appropriate to attempt these climbs, crampons and ice tools, be included in a future guide? Or should there be some sort of note that, you know, kind of shares that these routes are being shared for historical purposes? Maybe noting that perhaps we're to a point in climbing where it might not be appropriate for people to kind of attempt these routes with sharps. And so, yeah, I'm kind of curious how you're approaching these historic climbs in your guidebook, and what your thoughts are on including these, maybe some of these summer rock routes.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, no, I think that's a great question, and I had kind of come to somewhat of a conclusion on that, but as you can imagine, there's a lot of gray area too. The examples that you had mentioned, like Sliding Board and Thin Air. Well, I mean, let's start with like, basically, like if it's not, how should I say this? I think we've got a pretty well defined notion these days of what a proper winter climb is. And I'm not planning on including routes like Sliding Board and things like that. I might make mention of, you know, just like almost an index in the back, an appendix in the back that would say, you know, the first time that the Fruit Cup wall in Cannon was climbed in the winter in 1970 something happened, just so that there's a historical catalog of that. But the routes that I want to include are going to be routes that are winter climbs. There's going to be a little bit of gray area where some routes are, you know, might be somebody else who is authoring it may not have included, but I do want to keep it to things that are properly considered winter routes now. Things that you can give a water ice grade, a mixed grade to, that kind of thing. Does that answer your question, you think?
Absolutely. No,
Yeah.
that's perfect. Yeah, that's exactly what I was trying to get at, or find out. Wanted to get your perspective on. So that's great. We're definitely gonna come back to you in the broader discussion, but I'm gonna turn our conversation a little bit now to the broader panel that are here tonight. And we got through the process of preparing for this evening's conversation, we got a lot of questions or suggestions for ideas people wanted to kind of hear thoughts on. And so I want to pose this question to a few folks on the panel, and I want to also invite anybody on the panel that if somebody said, if there's a thought you have that doesn't that is maybe a little bit different or divergent from the folks that maybe get called on throughout the process of this conversation, I want to invite you to chime in. We're going to try not to pose the same question to everybody, but if there's something specific that's burning in your mind when a certain question gets asked, I definitely want y'all to speak up. So I wanted to start with Majka. I want to pose this question to you first, and I'll probably pose this to a few folks. So this really gets at the heart of why we're here tonight. A celebrated part of climbing is the ability of individuals to decide the means by which they will ascend a given rock face or ice flow. With that said, climbing is full of unwritten rules. Do you feel that we need to re-examine the accepted ethics of our region with respect to winter climbing? And what currently guides your personal decision-making process when you approach a winter climb?
I think one of the pieces that we miss out on in the climbing dialogue is talking about mentorship. And I think that that's a confusing piece of the puzzle right now. Mentorship in some ways has been replaced by Instagram and by, conditions reports. And, when I think of ice climbing and I think of mixed climbing, particularly here, or when I used to live in Colorado, there was this, and I say this without trying to be, it's how am I suddenly part of the older guard? I'm 44. I don't think of myself as part of the older guard, but whatever. It's you kind of earned your stripes, and you also got to this point of watching things become in condition. And that's when you went to go do them. So I think a lot of these mixed climbs, it's kind of per Bayard's point, when they were done, it was done in winter spirit, or when it was in condition to do, it wasn't in condition to do it as a rock climb. It was what made it in condition to do it was because there was enough ice on it to make it possible. And so when I think of that type of climbing, when it's not just pure ice, that's what I'm looking for. It's wow, it just got interesting because there's just enough that this makes it okay. That this makes it a winter ascent versus scratching on rock that is effectively going and dry tooling a classic. Now, how do we translate that without it becoming a rule? And that's where I think the mentorship piece comes in. That's where, and I don't have the answer for that. And I think that that's something that we're, we're struggling with that as a climbing community, to say, how do you celebrate the newness and all the people who are coming to the table, and also say, hey, that's so amazing you're here. Can we talk about how to do this? Can we talk about how to make this possible to work for everybody? And I think in some ways we have to be willing to be vulnerable and make some mistakes when we do that and talk to people, right? I mean, post-COVID, we're going to have to fucking learn how to talk to people again, and how to talk to strangers, and how to walk up to them and be like, so I see that, you're scratching on this and I was kind of over here, but finding a way in these awkward conversations, because I don't know how we do it otherwise unless we reach out and be human in it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's a great perspective on the mentorship piece. It's honestly something I hadn't maybe fully considered. So yeah, thanks for that, for sharing that. Yeah, that's great. I'm trying to toss this over, the same question over to somebody else. I'm wondering, Mark, if you might have anything additional to share. I'd love to hear your perspective on this.
Thank you. And thanks, Bayard. That was an awesome presentation. I appreciated that. It's great photographs. So I agree with what Majka said. I think mentorship is a really important part of our climbing community in general, and just being better climbers, better stewards, better people, more, conscientious of a lot of things. But I would like to just remind everybody, or remember myself, that, our sport's evolving. It's constantly evolved. It's so much different now than when I started climbing, and when the people who taught me to climb started climbing. And that's a good thing. And it's exciting. But we also have to be willing to change ourselves, because climbing has definitely become more popular. There's a lot more people doing it, and I think that's a good thing. I love to see people getting out into the outdoors and getting the joy out of climbing like I have. But we have, our natural climbing areas is a limited resource, and we have to understand that. So we have to begin to change the way we use them, and the way we recreate in them, and the way we, collaborate there, and all those things. And so this is a really good forum. I'm really glad we're having it, and we're beginning the discussion. And there are certainly compromises we're going to have to make. I mean, when I started climbing, people were still mainly protecting with pitons. The advent of natural protection hadn't really occurred, and that changed. But there were some people who really resisted that. Sure, Bruce Franks can remember that. There are a few other people probably on the call. And, it took a little while. I like to bring up, I was thinking about, sort of an extraordinary example of how ethics would have changed. If you look at, say, for example, the climbing in East Germany, or in the Alpenstein in Dresden, where that climbing, they had to literally stop people from using any form of hard protection, and only jammed knots and shoes with rope soles on them, and no chalk. And to this day, much of that area still uses those, style of climbing, because they destroy their very precious rock if they didn't. And they accepted that. And they developed a very interesting type of climbing. And I think we need to rethink how we mixed climb now. And although mixed climbing is tons of fun, and I get it, everybody wants to go out there and do these things that, we get to do 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, we need to understand that they are, if it's damaging the rock in a way that it's going to transform it, and that others won't be able to enjoy it as a rock climb, for example, maybe that's not such a good idea. So, how I characterize, getting back to your original question, what's a mixed climb and what's a rock climb? Well, it's all climbing. And, but I would say that, especially on our, iconic cliffs like Cathedral and Whitehorse in particular, we need to preserve the pure rock climbs, because I think there's more opportunity for all of us to enjoy those if they are protected as rock climbs. And it's as simple as and pragmatic approach as that to me. So that's how I see it.
Thanks, Mark. That's awesome. Great response. I appreciate that. I want to turn the same question to Zach St. Jules, who wrote a great op-ed in Rock and Ice a few weeks ago. If people haven't seen that, he highlighted John Nicolodi's ascent of cryokinesis, really kind of futuristic perspective, I guess, futuristic ascent in a lot of ways, the way he kind of approached that climb. So I kind of wanted to get your perspective, Zach. You're someone who likes to get out there and climb hard on tools, oftentimes on rock. So I'm just really curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, it's funny. I think this is one of those things where I don't mean to compare myself. Oh God, this is bad. I don't mean to compare myself to Alex Honnold, but Alex Honnold talked about how everybody thinks that he just solos all the time. And I promise you, I don't just dry tool all the time. But anyway, I like Mark's point there about sort of just rethinking about what mixed climbing looks like. And that's what that op-ed was really trying to highlight was that, and it's not even, this isn't a progression. This is almost this is a step back in a way. This is how people approached winter climbing before. Like, you climbed how conditions permitted. And so that's all that John did on that ascent, is that, okay, you know, when we talk about, I feel like I've made this point, you know, amongst our friend group a ton, so they're probably tired of me hearing or saying this, but mixed climbing isn't just mixed mediums, it's mixed techniques. And we have to look at it that way. If we're going to keep being able to climb winter routes on Cathedral. And just to clarify that a little bit too, I don't think that the style that John did, cryokinesis, is the standard for all mixed climbing going forward. But it is maybe the standard that allows us to continue winter climbing on Cathedral specifically.
Great, thanks, Zach. Thanks for that. I don't know if we, I don't know if we did, but if we could drop that article into the chat, if anyone has that, I think that'd be great to share. I thought it was well done and great documentation of a really proud send on John's part.
The editor is very good. I'm not a good writer. I had a good editor.
That's awesome. Cool. I'm gonna move on to the next question, recognizing that Janet and Bayard haven't weighed in on this, but I want to allow them to chime in if this is kind of a root question. So I want to give you a chance if you want to say anything on this particular question. I'm gonna turn to you next, Janet, if you're on this next one, and if you want to riff into this past question on with your response, that's cool too. So Janet, many people have expressed a desire for a list of rock routes that are acceptable to climb using crampons and ice tools. Do you support the creation of such a list, or are there alternative ways that you would go about clearly defining what's in and what's out? If you favor a list, what routes would you include?
Thanks for that, Mike. And so awesome to see everyone here. I'm pleased to be here. I know I have a tired 2-year-old on my lap, so hopefully he'll let me talk a little bit. So
I think we lost you, Janet.
I'm not getting the unstable signal. But
now you're back.
Oh, okay, great. Oh, now I am getting the unstable. I'll try again here. So I think a list is a positive idea. I'm a little hesitant, I guess, to make it a digital, faceless interaction that doesn't involve like what Majka and Mark discussed with mentorship and with the opportunity for folks to, you know, kind of develop like what's coming from their own heart, how they evolve with their practices, where they're coming from, and just a straight up list where it's someone else thinking for us, I'm not sure is going to resolve things. As Mike said in the intro, I consider myself mostly rock climber, and I think my perspective tonight is just that, you know, the rock can't talk, the future generations of climbers can't talk here, and I think the simplest logic is to go with what's sustainable, and especially when it comes to existing rock climbs. And another piece of this that I really care about is that we have that there aren't different standards based on experience or where you live or who you know. And so I know that the list some kind of list of what's okay would attempt to do that, or an in list. So that's why I don't want to say it's a bad idea. I just worry that it's not human enough, I guess. So I don't have a
I think we're You got a little, we lost you again, but I think we got you just before you cut out. Cool. Thanks, Janet. Thanks for that thought. Hey, Bayard, as somebody who's working on compiling a big list of ice climbs, I'm kind of curious on your thoughts on this topic.
I don't think it's a good idea, actually. Maybe at some point, but I would like to see efforts like this have a chance to settle in. I think a lot of the stuff is actually pretty obvious when you think past just what you want to do on that day. You know, I mean, if a route's got a lot of ice on it and you're not going to mess up the rock, it's maybe a good time to climb it, you know, and that route might come in one day that's on your list, you know, but more generally, I would suggest that we let people make decisions with information. And I think this forum is a good way to begin to address that.
Cool. Zach St. Jules, do you have any thoughts on the topic of a list of in and out?
I do. Yeah, I'm not opposed to it. I just think that it's worth considering the next steps. So you make the list, sure, but then you have to consider enforcement or what does that look like? You can, I suppose what are folks' thoughts on sort of what that looks like going forward? I mean, I'm not opposed to a list, but I think, I don't know. I made this point too, where if you let's say you put cryokinesis on that list, no, like, and maybe I'm in the danger of running into what Bayard was saying in his opening. Like, in my mind, nobody's going to go up there. Like, nobody's going to do that route. Like, but Bayard sort of already addressed that. So maybe I'm just wrong in thinking that way. But if we are considering a list, I think we got to look at the next step, which is enforcement, and what does that look like? And maybe the mentorship part of it, it's a big answer to that.
I think it's beyond that. I think, mentorship is part of it and education is part of it. And this is one step, like we're having this forum. And again, I don't know the answer. Like, I don't know if it can, like, there's a kiosk and as you drive in, you have to get a piece of paper, like when you go to Acadia, and who reads that? Nobody reads that, right? Like, what happens? But how do we create larger collective understanding that this is what we need to move to? And I think that's the nut we need to crack, because if we have a list, it's one thing. And then, yes, Zach, how do we enforce it? How do we decide what's going to be on there? How is it human, per Janet's point? But really what we're trying to do is create this larger community of awareness and of an education piece. And so that's mentorship. It's us coming at this from all these different angles. And I think that that's what we need to be sitting in conversation around. And it's not going to be easy, right? Like, there's some pieces of the puzzle, like even just the posters that are now up, right, that are at Frankenstein, those make a difference. And can you guarantee that everyone's going to read them? But if we all make steps toward like bringing this conversation forward, I think that can also have a significant impact in it's like there's a 8-point, I was about to say attack, and that's a wrong word, but it's like an 8-pronged strategy that we need to have with this. And I think, unfortunately, that's the reality. It's not just one thing, like, here's the list.
I think that's a great point, for sure. And I think, as was pointed out, this is really the first step, and there's probably many steps in front of us to kind of building that community awareness about concern and figuring out what the community kind of collectively in general believes on this topic. But I think, yeah, those are all great points. And it gets a little bit to a question I had down towards the bottom of my list of questions, but I think it's pertinent, and that because you bring this up, Majka, just the engagement of Friends of the Ledges in this conversation, Access Fund, perhaps guiding outfits. And I'm kind of curious if anybody has a perspective on the roles of Friends of the Ledges, of the Access Fund, of local guiding outfits, maybe other organizations or groups or individuals I'm not thinking of. Kind of curious what your thoughts are about the role that those sorts of groups have to play in this, and how they can help kind of bring this this conversation, this topic kind of to light for more people that are visiting the Valley, that are from the Valley, that enjoy climbing the White Mountains in general. I'll pose that to Mark. If you want to, I'd like to hear your thoughts on how you see organizations kind of playing a role in this conversation.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think organizations should play a strong role, and especially because, you know, to Zach's point, I don't really like the idea of enforcement. I mean, I like the climbers to sort of take care of our own issues. I think that's always been best. And as soon as you talk about enforcement, who's the enforcer? Is going to be state or local, enforcement, and we don't want that. We want to take care of it ourselves. So yes, I think the local guiding organizations should strongly encourage practices that will conserve our climbing resource always, and instruct and mentor those people who are beginning to, climbing, and those people who are doing things that may not be cool out there, to help, encourage them to climb better and to climb in a way that's less impactful. I think that should definitely be the foundation of our all our organizations, including Friends of the Ledges, including the Access Fund, and all our climbing organizations and our climbing gyms. I really think, this whole gym to crag movement, which is so important, I think really needs to focus on conservation and, of our resource of climbing, because there's so many more people there. And there's as Majka said, it's an 8-pronged strategy, or maybe a 12. There's a lot of different ways to approach this. We need to do all of them. But I think we all need to agree what's important is we have a limited amount of climbing resource, and, the ice comes and goes, the rock does not. So we need to remember that that's the difference. And, I've seen climbing areas throughout Europe, as any of the other panelists has, grid bolted from top to bottom. They've destroyed their crags in many ways. They have no semblance of adventure left on them. We don't want that. And do we also want all our wonderful rock climbs just, powdered away from, incessant clawing and digging? No, we don't want that. I don't think so. We need to recognize that. I wasn't aware of this, but it was pointed out in the comments leading up to this forum, how the dry tooling is destroying the roots in the cave, for example, at Cathedral. And I think that's wrong. I think the climbers should stop doing that. That's my opinion, but those are pure rock climbs. There's no ice in there. And I think we can take, and they're important. They're important, maybe not to rock climbs to everyone, but to some people they are. So I do think we need to draw the line, find some consensus, and those organizations that are helping to usher in the new generations of climbers in particular need to express their opinion and mentor and educate in a way that will protect that resource going forward. So yes, that's what I have to say about that.
That's great. No, that's a very thorough answer. Janet.
Yeah, I'm unstable again. I'm sorry. I agree with everything Mark said, and it occurred to me that maybe something we can do and agree to is this policing thing. If someone or numbers of individuals have crossed the line, what's our process as a community for calling them in and not ostracizing them? And I think thinking about those things can get us far in our evolution.
It's a great point. Want to let anybody else chime in on this point of education, if anyone's eager, has an additional thought?
One thing I'd like to just add, Mike, is I'm going to not continued to mix climb on any of the climbs on Cathedral that I know are traditional rock climbs, because and I've enjoyed them, and they are fun. Everybody who does them knows that. Climbs like Deidre and even Diagonal and some of the other ones. But it's not that important to me, and I hope others will share that same thought, that feeling, because there's so many other things to climb. We don't have to do those. They're great climbs, but there's plenty of other great climbs. So that's just a personal decision, but yeah.
Mike, I see you unmuted over there.
I had a couple things to say. I think that inside of your question, Mike, about, guiding organization, guiding services, access fund, friend of the ledges, we're trying to teach people not to take a shit at the bottom of a climb. Like, let's also bring into the dialogue, like, hey, even for people who at the very beginning of their ice climbing career, who could never imagine climbing one of these other routes, being, to start bringing that into the education so they see the trajectory. So anybody who we touch, it just becomes part of that dialogue. And I think that could help a lot. And I think that is a responsibility. And I think it's something that, all the organizations and guide services involved could do that. So like, they're becoming stewards of that land. I think that, to Janet's point about how to call people in, I think that it is so hard to be a new climber, right? And to fit in and to feel like, you want to be part of that crew that just knows where to go and what to do and what to wear and how to climb. And, the majority of us on this call, like, we're past that. And I think it's so important to remember that, and to remember how hard it is to ask for help, how hard it is to feel like you can fit in, let alone if you don't look like everybody else who's in this climbing community. And I think we need to be really conscientious of, like, how to not create this as some sort of like Gestapo policing that doesn't further these other tenets that I think are really important for our climbing community, which is how we can include more people, but also not draw down the resource that we have. And I think, again, it comes down to like the 8 or now apparently 12-prong plan that we need to create, so we can call people in, we can bring people forward, and we can make sure that we have it here. And there's no silver bullet to that.
Yeah, those are all great points. Michael.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna tell you that Larson's trying to say something.
Yeah, I see the hand. I wanted to, before I get to Michael real quick, I wanted to ask Zach his perspective on this. You kind of, I would say, not to put you on the spot in a awkward way, but you kind of represent maybe a younger generation of climber in the Valley, and you definitely climb with a lot of the younger climbers in the Valley. And I wonder if you have some thoughts on like kind of what Micah was getting at.
Yeah, it's interesting. Totally relatable. Not trying to be confrontational. I guess I'm surprised to hear that perspective, not specifically from you, Micah, but like just from the old guard. I coming into climbing, that's such a relatable thing. I remember, I don't know how many years it's been now, but like just trying to get somebody to take me out or, teach me even just basic things so that I could expand my knowledge. It was, yeah, I'm such a huge fan of that approach. I don't know that the general consensus for the younger group coming up is that y'all are available for that. And yeah, I don't know how else to say that, I guess, but
that's I think it's a fair perspective to share, for sure. And I think it's important perspective to share. Michael Larson, I want to give you a chance to speak up here.
Am I on?
You're there.
Hear me?
Hear ya.
All right, I guess I'll quickly chime in. Just it was my comment about the cave in the write-up, and I think like we have talked about here a little bit, we've all seen significant increase in all outdoor activities here recently, which is universal, seemingly everywhere right now, and climbing in general, and I think winter climbing can no longer be considered niche activities where just a couple people are doing them and partaking amongst themselves. And so I think we need to treat it differently, because there are lots of people and a lot more than we're used to going out right now. And it does seem like, especially in the winter climbing trend, it's maybe lagging a little bit behind, but I think that's not a reason to sit on our hands and be a little bit lax. I think it's the opposite, that, we need to address it right now, because once there's a huge community consensus and backing behind a certain ethic or style, it's going to be virtually impossible to change it, especially since there seems to be agreement that, a strict enforcement is not the approach, and it's more just like an accepted practice, and it doesn't need to be discussed. Once there's be achieved a lot easier. But I did end up in the cave as a result of COVID and just searching for local things this year. And I had previously climbed a couple of the routes in years past, and having not been in there for a couple of years was quite honestly shocked at how the routes had changed just in, a couple of years. Edges breaking off, gigantic holes, that you could almost fit your fist in, created where there were just seams before. And, this is September. It's basically summer. We're climbing in a t-shirt, and every session without fail, I would have to go in there and brush out sand from these holes. So people are going in there in the middle of the summer. There's no ice, there's no frost, there's no even trace of winter being around. And I did a little bit of background research, calling numerous folks in town to kind of see what was going on. And I don't blame anyone that's going in there in the immediate, because the consensus was that those routes had basically been given up upon as rock climbs, which to me is really a shame. Those are rock climbs, and they were always rock climbs. And for better or worse, something like the Mercy is historic. And it's historic from a sense, if nothing else, that it could be a scar on the area and a reminder that, we need to be a little bit smarter and on the right side of the history. And that route was manufactured, but I don't think it's as manufactured as maybe a lot of people think. And whether it's the intent or the result of dry tooling, that is the outcome every time. Every single hold and hand and foot placement completely alters the state, and it doesn't happen instantly. Your ascent is likely not going to have a big impact, but over the course of a season and years, it's huge. I mean, that route in particular, my understanding is an entire sequence is now gone, and other sequences exist strictly because holds were created by dry toolers, not by anyone manufacturing them. And basically, we're in an area, there's not a ton of hard routes, and I think we need to be aware of that and mindful that what someone deems as hard and not accessible to the masses today isn't going to be the case in a few years. And, maybe at one point in time it was, not that many people were wanting to climb on the Mercy, but in my brief experience in the cave, I thought those routes were all quite quality, and I think if people went and tried them, they would realize that, they're fine routes to climb on, and they deserve a little bit more traffic. And so my personal opinion about what is deemed accessible or acceptable or not isn't so much relevant, and it's not really here what I'm trying to share. Although I would be happy to vocalize that if it's desired. But I do fully agree with Janet that whatever is decided, it needs to be universal. It cannot be oh, it's okay for this person today or this instance tomorrow. It needs to be anyone from anywhere in all situations. I mean, I'm not going to say that if a route is fully covered in ice or with very limited ice, that's obviously different, but we cannot have localitis here or anything where, you know, oh, this is acceptable if you cover it up or you don't share it on social media or you're from this area or whatever it needs to be. It's either right or it's wrong. And once it's right, there's no reason to justify it any further. So yeah, I guess I'll pass it back to you guys.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks for sharing your perspective on that. That's, I think, well said. And yeah, it's definitely good to hear some kind of firsthand experience on maybe some of the impacts you witnessed, and then, yeah, kind of sharing some additional thoughts there. One thing that strikes me in this conversation, and Mark, you touched on this a little bit, is kind of this parallel perhaps between kind of that transition in the climbing history when we kind of moved away from pitons. And, you know, you touched on the fact that there was this kind of, it wasn't an immediate like moment in time that people accepted that pitons weren't acceptable form of protection when they were climbing. I'm kind of curious, you know, can you shed a little more light on that process? Like, do you have any insights into that process of the climbing community kind of coming to terms with pitons? And then what do you see as parallels?
Well, I mean, there are some parallels, but one of the things that is different is that, you know, modern passive protection, nuts and, you know, non-piton type forms of protection were better. So it was a little bit of an easier transition in so many ways, but still people continue to use pitons, and they do today on hard aid climbs. And when you can't get a nut in somewhere, when it's too thin, people still use pitons. But what it did is it allowed us, I think, to realize that we didn't need them, and that we certainly didn't need them to the extent. I mean, most of the traditional climbs on Cathedral, for example, were littered with pitons. Originally, they were there for many years. Some of them still are on the cliff, but it didn't take people too long to figure out that we didn't need them, and the climbing was better without them. And although, so that it's a little bit different, you know, issue, but at the same point, I think. So I saw reading through the chat here, which was kind of interesting. Well, maybe there should be no winter climbing on any rock climbs. I would tend to agree in that there should be no, perhaps, winter climbing on rock climbs using crampons and ice axes. But if you're able to climb it without those things, so I don't think anybody would mind if you did a winter ascent of Deidre in rock shoes. Right. So, right. You know, maybe we need to rethink how we're doing these things. That certainly would up the ante, wouldn't it? So I think maybe we have to start looking at it a little bit differently. How can we enjoy climbing more, but just not wreck the rock climbs? So just like we moved away from pitons specifically because it was destroying the cracks. I mean, you know, what were once thin razor blade cracks now had holes in them that you could put your hand in. That's what's going to happen to our rock climbs from excessive dry tooling. No question about it. They're just as aggressive as pitons, maybe more so even. So, you know, but it doesn't mean we can't, we just have to rethink how we're doing it. So that's the parallel I can see there is rethink about it. Initially, I'm sure when all of a sudden, you know, passive protection became popular, people were thinking, well, I'm not climbing that without pitons. Pitons are better, and that's what I've always used. But they, you know, eventually saw the light as better climbers were, you know, not using pitons at all and doing the same hard routes that they were able to do, and whether free or aid. And so, yeah, I think, and of course, no one's going to probably say that if you go to the Himalaya, you can't dry tool some section, but we're talking about our local crags. So here's where we need to as we've said, have a consensus. I don't agree with enforcement by any, because that always opens up to me a dangerous pathway that all of a sudden, we're enforcing all kinds of things, and that maybe we don't want to change the way we climb. So, but I think as a community, we need to come together, decide on what the end goal is. Before we focus on, okay, what climbs should be on or off, what's our end goal? Our end goal, I hope, is to conserve the limited resource of rock climbs for future generations and for all of us to enjoy. So how are we going to get there? Before we start coming up with, methods and which climbs are on, which are on, who can do this and who can't, is what do we want to do? We want to conserve that. So what do we need to do collectively to get there? And there's lots of things we can do.
Thanks for that, Mark. I want to go to I have Meg's feeding me some comments here on the back end. I want to read one of them and see if I can get some thoughts from folks. Bayard, I'm going to toss this over to you. The comment here is from Michelle Santos. It says, perhaps a new area that is not developed rock climbing, that is not a developed rock climbing area, should be sought out to satiate the climbers who wish to dry tool, so that the Cathedral Cave will have much less or no traffic. There is plenty of Chaucy rock around in the area that could fit the bill. And Bayard, I'm wondering, as you're thinking about this guidebook, if there are going to be any, there's a few places I can think of, a few kind of Chaucy crags off the radar that are, are kind of generally considered good dry tooling or acceptable dry tooling spots. I wonder if you're going to include any of those.
Well, that's the hope, right? I think part of the problem is that maybe a lot of that information from ascents that have been done just isn't out there. The reality of it is, though, is that our geology does not lend itself towards big overhang and caves. And modern mixed climbing, like the sport style mixed climbing, that's kind of what it demands. So there's really only a couple spots that have that in the White Mountains. One of them is the Cathedral Cave. It's what's happening there is unfortunate. And I just want to say that I really like what you had to say, Michael. Thanks for speaking up. I respect that opinion a lot, and I agree with it. There are other areas. We will do what we can to document them. But the reality of it is, if you really want to climb upside down mixed routes, you might have to go to Vail, or you might have to go to the Canadian Rockies, because there's not a lot of that here. What we do have is like a lot of good traditional mixed climbing that's at a different angle that either you like or you don't like. But personally, I love. So maybe that's one of the reasons why I'm here.
I want to thank you, Bayard. I want to encourage people that might have a question to use the raise hand function. We're getting on in the hours here, and Michael navigated the raise hand. I want to encourage other people to do the same. We do have some comments coming in on the back end, but I would say that most of them aren't necessarily questions. And I'm happy to read some comments for reaction, but I'd love to know if anybody in the broader audience this evening has any questions that have been spurred by the conversation thus far. And if you do, please use the raise hand function, or if you can't manage that, feel free to wave wildly and we'll try to see you here. And barring that, I'm going to move on to another question here. Stand by one second. My screen here.
Can I jump in with a quick point? I wanted to, Bayard said something earlier, and a few people have made this comment. Like, I think it's not as cut and dry or as easy as we make it sound here in this conversation. Like the granite seems really hard, and you can feel like you're not having an impact. So I think it's that decision making can be pretty subtle, and it's that it's these minuscule impacts over time, which is it's not like you're on limestone where it's obvious that you're pulling off a hold. And to that, I just wanted to add that to this. And I don't know, like Bayard, if you want to comment that, because you were like, oh, you just make the call, but like sometimes the call is pretty hard to make.
Yeah, no, that's fair. It is. Steel is definitely harder than granite. You see it over time. When a lot of climbs on Cathedral were first getting climbed in the winter time, I think it was, like you say, completely inobvious, but you can really tell now the traffic's there. Yeah, no, it definitely leaves a mark. There's absolutely no question at all there.
Ryan O'Leary, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I've sort of talked to a couple different people about this, sort of the Mercy in particular. And from what I understand, it was chipped. Chipped is chipped. I mean, I don't know that I agree with chips is chipped, but on a route like that, if it has drilled holes, I think if what Michael said was it's a history, a lesson of what we shouldn't have done. And if that can't be dry tooled, I don't know really if it should be kept around. Let's take the bolts off it then, I would say, if it's that much of a scar on the New England history.
Any reactions to that, panelists? Majka, how about you? I'm going to call on you.
You can't say any reaction, then just like throw me into the bus. Jesus, Maureen. I don't think it has an easy reaction. I mean, I hear what you're saying, Brian. You're like, hey, if it's been modified, then why not modify it more? And Michael's like, yeah, it's not been modified. It was modified a little bit and still really climbable. It's out of my pay grade as a sport climber. But I think, the point that could change, I think, what Sarah said is that it's exactly this, right? It's not that easy. We talk about it like, oh, this is really clear and here's how it goes. And it gets really nebulous as we go forward on it. And inside of this, like, we're probably going to mess it up. We probably already are messing it up, right? Like, I just really want to keep saying there's a level of humanity and gentleness that we have to do this, because this is tricky territory. And we're here, and I applaud Friends of the Ledges for bringing us here. And let's just remember to I live with 2 4.5-year-olds. There's a lot of high emotions and high drama. Let's just take a breath and do a take 2 sometimes when we get into that, because we're going to need it in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years. We're going to need it a hell of a lot.
Wise words. Thanks, Majka. Zach, I saw you on mute there for a second. I want to give you a chance to chime in.
Sure. Yeah, nothing really. I mean, I just think we can get. What's up, Brian? I just think we can get too caught up in the cave specifically. Like, I just think this is a bigger conversation than the cave. Everybody knows I don't give a shit about the cave. Like about not mixed winter climbing in there. Like, I think this is a bigger conversation than that. To Brian's point, the cave is an example, fine. But if that's all that this is about, then I don't think this is a big. Everybody here has all acknowledged that dry tooling ruins the rock. That's not a question. We all sort of know that. It's just, how do we move forward? How do we allow mixed climbers to continue to pursue their craft? That I think is the bigger maybe question here. And then, to everybody else's point, to Mark's point, everybody's point, this is an educational campaign, more than it is a rules thing. So I don't know. The conversation specifically about the cave just feels really limited to me.
You're muted, Mike.
Thanks. Michael, I see your hand up. I want to make sure we don't turn this into a back and forth, but I do want to give you a chance to chime in if you have something to share.
Yeah, I agree entirely with Zach about not turning it into a discussion on the cave, because I think there are far more important areas of the cliff and of other cliffs to get to. I guess in the interest of transparency, Zach came up to the cliff, to the cave, one of the days we were there, and I think it prompted a pretty honest and frank discussion between him and I and a couple other folks, and I commend him for his honesty and his ability to talk about it. And yeah, like I said, it was my understanding that that was accepted practice in town, and so I certainly don't blame anyone for going out there. I'm using it as my experience and a way to show what can happen, because I think that's the most egregious example right now. I'll also say that I have climbed Deidre in the winter and feel awful about that personally. And I mean, I don't think it's that far off from happening. And so I don't think it's an example at all to say like, oh, so someone made a mistake and there was damage, therefore we just like throw it away and can just give it up forever. And so I strongly refute that point, but I just don't see where it ends. I mean, I think it's very easy to look at a lot of these classic routes and say, oh, well, no one would ever dare to go up there, but I don't see why. I think that people are going to push it, and I don't mean push the boundaries. I just mean people are trying to find new terrain and do new things. And I personally don't do much dry tooling, but I recognize that it is a pursuit that people like, and I don't discredit that. And although it's not what I'm interested in, I see a lot of areas of the cliff that would make theoretically good dry tooling. And so I think we need to figure out where we can go with it, because there's no reason that someone, whether it's someone in this discussion or not, wouldn't look at something and say, that looks cool, I want to go do it. And I don't really see why anything in the cave is any different, because ultimately people are just trying to find new things that they enjoy to do.
Looks like Steve is raising his physical hand there, Mike.
If you see him, can you unmute?
I'll see if I can unmute you, Steve. There we go, I found it. Steve, you're still muted.
There you go. You can hear, yep, you're good.
So anyways, it has just been stated that everyone knows that dry tooling ruins the rock. And if we can take that as a fact moving forward, then the question is, what are we going to do about it? And I believe that mixed climbing has been an experiment, and it's definitely been, I think there's a downside to this experiment. And I think basically that's what we're here for. And part of me just wonders, when we consider the prerogative of the first ascent, which has been something that has been one of our historical bases around here, perhaps when someone rock climbs a route, it should be a rock climb. And perhaps when someone mixed climbs a route, it should be a mixed climb. And it's easy to go. We've always had this problem with people going to, when people were sport climbing, they wanted to bolt established routes because it was the fashion. And of course, if they were to do that, then they would be changing it for everyone. And I think based on the fact that if we're going to acknowledge that dry tooling ruins the rock, then that's what we're talking about allowing or disallowing. And so to those mixed climbers, instead of just taking the easy walk to Cathedral, I think if they were to find their own climbs and they do find aeration out there, and we all know it's out there somewhere, and they decide that it's a mixed climb, more power to them. And I don't think I or anybody else should be critical as to what they choose to do with that crack, because they got there first. But I think that they need to respect, or we should think about respecting these existing routes, especially when you're changing them for eternity.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Jim Surratt, get your hand.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
So this is a question for any of the guys who've been active dry tooling in the cave. There seems to be this justification that, you know, the Mercy had a couple of chips holds on it back in the day, and that was the reason to start dry tooling that. But I know people have also been dry tooling Devil Made Me Dog It. And I know Sanctuary is considered a pretty stellar route by all accounts. I'm curious if people are dry tooling Sanctuary or any other routes. What are you telling me, that you're only going and doing the Mercy, or what other routes are you dry tooling in there? That's my question.
All right. Brian, are you raising your hand over there?
Yeah, I was. Yeah, personally, I've only ever done Satanic Verses, which is an extension to the Mercy, and Work with the Devil, which is an extension to Devil Made Me Dog It. I don't really have much interest in routes that end in mid-cliff belays. So, in my mind.
We have a couple really good questions in the comments I want to touch on to the panel here. I'm going to start with this question. I don't have a name associated with it, but well, maybe this came from Meg actually. So we had a comment on Instagram earlier in the winter about the routes in Huntington and climbing Dry Rock and Huntington Ravine. This is an interesting one. This Alpine versus, out of the Alpine question, I think, has been a topic of conversation as we've been preparing for this conversation tonight. It's come up a few times. I'm kind of curious how folks kind of parse that out. I know there's been at least one new route put up on the Central Buttress in Huntington Ravine in the past couple of years, where the first ascensionist there is a little bit less psyched about people dry tooling that route. But how do folks feel about how Huntington plays into this conversation and routes in the Alpine in general? I'd toss that I'll toss that out there. Does anybody have anybody have a thought on that from the panel? I don't want to.
I'll throw my head out there on that one, just to tell you my own personal experience. And this is, again, going back through time, not just like this second and working in a context that was void of this conversation. But I have always liked, not always, but I don't know, maybe the past 10 years or so, have approached those more alpine zones, even like Cannon, Huntington Ravine. I like to climb up there when there is winter conditions. And it's something that was really enforced or shown to me when I was on the Scottish winter meet, climbing in the Scottish Highlands, and their ethics around winter climbing. For those guys that don't know about that, they only climb on routes that are covered in snow. They barely even have any ice. And if it doesn't have any snow on it, then it's out. But that all sounds good, but they still have this same conversation there, because what happens in Scotland is, and this may inform our conversation going forward, they're just climbing over snow and crampons. It's not ice. They're scratching up rock climbs, and the routes that they're doing are often shared with rock climbs. So it serves as a way to limit traffic, but it's not the same as climbing 2 inches of ice over a rock climb and not ever touching it by any means. So anyway, Cannon, Huntington, I've always had that sort of an idea in my head and tried to climb there when the cracks are iced up, there's snow on the roofs, that kind of thing. So that's just me. Yeah.
Janet, I want to put you on the spot a little bit, if that's okay. You know, kind of the hardliner on the rock climbing. I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Sure. I mean, I think for me personally, it's just not an issue. But I do think it's important to think about the rock climbers on those routes. And so I think it's a pretty simple formula that if it's a rock climb, it probably shouldn't be winter climbed.
Anybody else have a different thought or anything to add on that topic?
Yeah, I'd agree with Janet on that, except it shouldn't be winter climbed with crampons and ice axes.
Sure, with sharp shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With sharp stuff, yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to throw it out there that I think that's a little too general. And I'll give you a good example. And I don't want to get, not to drag it into specifics, but there's a route at the north end of Cathedral. It's, what the heck is it called? It's between the roof and the Possessed. It is a disgusting, dirty rock climb. And it is a rock climb.
Whatever it is.
What's that?
Black crack or whatever that thing is.
Black crack. Yeah. Black crack. Thank you. And that's a rock climb, but man, it's a really good mixed route and it's not a very good rock climb. So without going too far into specifics, I'm just saying that like there are things out there that actually might have more value as winter routes.
Yeah, well, I'm going to chime in there. I agree with you, Bayard. I mean, Remission, Repentance are two really prominent examples of that.
That's exactly right.
And although they are primarily ice climbs, there's rock climbing on them. And I climbed both of them as rock climbs long before they were ice climbs. So
and they were, exactly, yeah.
They are historic in that regard. But I don't think, though, that the amount of dry tooling that's done on those routes typically, I mean, provided people are climbing them with mostly ice, is affecting the rock climbing value of them. If somebody still wants to go out and climb Remission, which by the way is a pretty good rock climb, or Repentance, also a good rock climb, I don't think they're being affected by the winter activity. So, you know, I agree. It's not, that's why a list is not. However, if everybody were charging up Repentance and Remission when there was no ice on it, it would. And so I think it's not so much about a list. It's about if the north end of Cathedral, the Barber Wall is covered in a huge sheet of ice that goes from top to bottom, I think it's okay to ice climb there. If there's no ice on it and your people are going up there and dry tooling up the cracks, I think that's a bad idea. So year to year, it changes, and some routes are generally ice climbs, but we need to be intelligent about it and think about what's the best long-term approach for conserving our limited resource of rock climbing in the region.
Can I just add one quick thing? I think this part of the conversation is what's most important. We've never had a forum like this that I'm aware of. I mean, that there's a shift there. It seems like an obvious shift in our community from like live free or die, like cowboy town or cowgirl town to, maybe we want to assume rock climbs are not to be winter climbed, and the discussion goes from there. And that would demarcate a huge shift in my eyes.
I think your statement there brings up a great segue. And Michael, I see your hand up. I want to acknowledge though and read a comment from Justin Priesendorfer on this topic. Justin writes, "It's important to acknowledge how the community has largely abstained from mixed climbing at Rumney. Some great mixed lines were done there in the cowboy days, Bayard described, but the potential for future damage called for a different approach. Routes weren't publicized, and the Rumney Climbers Association has stated that mixed climbing is discouraged. Does it still happen? Sure, but the community self-polices, and grace is extended to those who don't understand the local ethic. So I think that's an important note and a great point by Justin on that topic. Michael, go ahead.
I think that there. I mean, we've been getting to it, but if you're climbing all ice, it doesn't matter if it's over a rock climb or not. If you're not touching ice with your tools, then no one has any problem. But I think in simplest form, the default needs to be that a rock climb that is a rock climb and was always a rock climb, or done first as a rock climb, remains a rock climb and is not climbed in the winter with tools. And sure, there can be exceptions, and that's where, at least in my view, the exceptions can become this list that was discussed, where a route like Black Magic or Repentance and Remission get added to that because they were first rock climbs. But I think if we create a list, it should be accompanied by rules that, you know, Bayard referenced, like rule number 1, if it's entirely ice, then no other rule applies. Good to go. And the rules only fall into play when there's gray areas. I just don't view that, like, if there's a little smear of ice somewhere on the cliff, you have access to go get to it in some way. And yeah, it's a little bit hard because ice climbing or rock climbing came first, and so therefore most of the terrain was done as a rock climb, and that does limit the access. But yeah, if you go find new terrain, even if it's on Cathedral, as far as I'm concerned, if you find terrain that isn't climbed, like John did on Cryokinesis at the top, that wasn't a rock climb, and so I don't personally have any issue. And I think that, you know, him coming up with a way to get to it, you know, power to him. That's great for him. But I just think, you know, if we create default as rock climbs are rock climbs and don't get metal scratched into them, that gets, you know, 90% or more of the way there.
Thanks, Michael. Appreciate your thoughts this evening. I want to share another comment that came in. I think this touches really on the broader conversation this evening, but I want to make sure that folks that have taken the time to share some thoughts, make sure, you know, get heard here. Jamie Cunningham wrote mentorship, education, leadership of well-known climbers, how climbs are presented in the climbing media, an ethic or right practice needs to be disseminated to the general climbing public. It requires some sort of community outreach vehicle. And I think that what Jamie getting at kind of touches on what's been talked about a lot this evening, just that need for both that mentorship piece, which Majka brought up, the importance of engagement by local groups, as well as the gyms, which Mark touched on. So I think those were all really great points. I think for anything that, you know, is coming out of this conversation, it's just the greater need for conversation and engagement in the community on this topic. And clearly this is the start of that at some level. Let's see here. I'm going to take a quick peek back into the comments and see. See, I have a comment here. Okay, here's a question from Justin Priesendorfer. Can we agree that sharps should not be used on established rock climbs unless they are primarily ice? And that's kind of, I mean, that's a question I think a lot of people have answered at this point, and I think but I'll throw it out there just for folks to chime in on. But I think I'll just say, I think the biggest challenge there is our 5 panelists, and everybody in this room can agree on that. But I guess the challenge then lies in convincing folks that aren't part of the conversation, or making people aware of that. So I'm gonna, if anyone has any reaction to that, I'll open it up to you. But I see Tom Moulin, I've seen you pop up a few times and your hand goes down. Do you have anything you want to chime in on? If you do, raise your hand again, and I'll make sure that you get called on here, because I know you have some thoughts. There you are. You're good to go. Oh, you're still muted, sounds like. We're not hearing you. Should be unmuted. No, can't hear you, Tom.
You might have to put it in the chat, Tom.
Yeah, if you want to type it out, happy to read your question or comment. Let's see. Anybody else have any questions that you'd want to chime in on? All right, I'm gonna go back to the comments then real quick here. We have Cameron McIntyre wrote, Janet has a great perspective. We need to approach this primarily from a rock climbing perspective. Rock climbing and ice route isn't going to harm the ice or mixed route, but the reverse is not true. That was a comment from Cameron McIntyre. And I got another one here from Bruce Franks. Preservation is local. If locals care, many issues are stopped before they begin. This is an excellent forum. Keep at it. The more you talk, the more talk spreads and permeates to others. The more we care and communicate, the better the message of best practices. Legacy and mentor groups will help provide conduits for communication. You can talk through lots of issues by talking. Make people feel welcome, make them included and recognized. And then that's from Bruce Franks.
Mike, I have a question. If there's a lull in questions, is there was a brief question earlier you posed about the role of organizations, and obviously as someone who's been leading the Friends of the Ledges for a while, I'm curious about the answer to that. So I would love to hear from folks about what they want to see coming from tonight. Like, would you want to see, I was going to type up a sort of summary so that people could read a really quick report about kind of the key points that were made. And I'm happy to do that. Should we have another meeting? Do you want, what do you want to see from the Friends of the Ledges coming from this evening? At some point we had 75, maybe 80 people here, but there's a lot more climbers in the Northeast than that. I'd love to hear people's thoughts.
If anyone has any thoughts on that, raise your hand. Here we go. Tom, I'm going to try you again.
Okay, hi,
Hey.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Nice.
Okay, great. Sorry, first time zooming. Yeah, so it sounds like everybody, that's kind of from a climbing background tends to agree that, the default should be, if it's an established rock climb, no sharps, and then, repentance, remission, kind of case by case, look at things like that. But maybe like some of the ice climbers can chime in, like what sort of rationale are you guys going through? I mean, I've heard this argument a lot where like, oh, well, we're just going to do it once. It's only scratching the rock a little bit. Like, is there some sort of bigger argument that we're missing here? Like, is everybody on board with this idea that the default setting should be, if it's an established rock climb, no sharps? Or do you guys have some sort of other view?
I'm happy to jump in on that one, Tom. And it's good to see you. I haven't seen you in a long time.
Hey.
I think that you're exactly right. I think that we're at a point now where the logic of, yeah, just me and my buddy are gonna go climb this thing. It's just the two of us. No one else is doing this. It's not a big deal. I think we're past that. And yeah, I feel like a little bit of a devil's advocate here. However, I am somewhat playing that role. I agree that, we shouldn't be dry tooling existing rock climbs. I just don't, I always shy away from big declarative statements like that, because like I said before, there are these exceptions which have been accepted by the community that were established rock climbs. So I guess that comes with this list thing behind it. And I think that what comes out of this meeting, kind of to get back to Sarah's point, is setting a tone of like, just listen to what's been said. There's some good ideas here. There's a broad consensus that like dry tooling rock climbs is a bad idea. Let that inform us going forward before we start writing lists and making rules up. That's just my perspective on it. I don't really disagree with anything that's been said from the perspective of keeping the ice axes and the crampons away from rock climbs.
Great, thanks, Bayard. Any, I want to, there's two kind of questions that have been posed out there, one from Tom, but then one from Sarah, which I mean, as we approach the end of our last hour here, I think there's a great opportunity for us to kind of collect some of that, some community feedback in this moment. And I'd love for people, if they're willing, to raise their hand and share their thoughts on how Friends of the Ledges can, what role they see, how Friends of the Ledges can be, continue to be a part of fostering this conversation. What are our next steps? How do folks see that kind of unrolling? I'd love to see some audience thoughts on that. Ideally, here we go. Frederick.
Hey guys.
Hey Freddie.
Hey, really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you, everyone. I've just been kind of listening in the background, and I guess I just wanted to share like one positive thought is that, listening to the dialogue about cathedral and the cave, of course, all sort of issues of environmental pressure come down to sort of, hot button locations where there's, multiple pressures, multiple user groups. And I think for us, kind of cathedral is going to be that critical space. And so it makes sense that we spend, 75% of our conversation talking about cathedral, because it represents our values throughout the rest of the climbing ecosystem as well. I guess two thoughts. One, with the inevitable trend of climate change, we're going to see warmer winters where routes like repentance and remission are going to be in less, and the action's going to be higher up in the notches, and that is just fact. And I'm not sure how to parse out the ramifications of that, but I think that's an important part to the conversation. And then the second point was that I don't want to have a negative note about like there not being a lot of steep mixed climbing terrain in New England. I think there is a lot of possibility, and there's more caves. There's Chaucy caves waiting to be discovered and bolted that rock climbers won't care about. And kind of Bayard in my generation was really lucky to find like Cocoa Crag, Slander Crag, and I have no doubt there's like 5 or 10 more places like that, within a 2-hour drive of North Conway. So I'd love to, just do what we can to focus energies on finding that space for steep mixed climbing to have a place in the White Mountains.
Thanks, Freddie.
I could jump in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I that's so important, and I think that's where I'm glad to be landing here. My wife has texted me a couple of times saying, so when do you guys get to the point where you talk about the future of mixed climbing? Like, and I'm glad we're kind of at this point now where I think everybody, I'm sure there's some exceptions here, but I think there's consensus on not dry tooling existing routes, existing rock routes, with sharp stuff. But, going back to the point early on is that you can still winter climb this stuff. You just got to use mixed techniques, but there's still lots of areas, and, we can think of a handful that really can still be developed. So this is meant to be encouragement to younger mixed climbers coming up. Like there's options, there's stuff to do. And so be encouraged.
I think that comes back to that mentorship piece that was touched on earlier. It's part of that is showing people the way, showing people these areas that maybe the energy isn't there for the current crop of seasoned climbers, but there is a lot of psych in the younger climbers to get out there and explore around. Maybe it's helping to guide them to those areas. Could be a good way to achieve what we're talking about in terms of taking that next step. I want to make sure that let's see here. Any other questions here? I'll just share. Matt Shove shared a comment here, which I think is interesting. He wrote that Cathedral has an identity crisis. It's not a sport climbing area. It's not a traditional climbing area, despite the moods it has. Dry and mixed climbing here is just an extension of that identity crisis. Interesting thought from our friend Matt Shove. Here's one from Nick Hernandez. Hi, Nick. Are there any crags currently that can be considered as more dry tooling focused instead of rock by the general group, or are they all intermingled? Creating a location for folks to go will help guide away from some of the overlapping conflicts. And there's been some talk of that this evening, but I wonder, if folks want to talk a little bit about what's out there currently.
Are you asking a group of Conway locals if they want to talk about their crags? Probably not.
No, not the super ones, but what are the known ones? I mean, you might assume that people know about these areas that you go to. There are maybe the known areas, but it's a fair point that maybe people outside the area might not necessarily know what we consider to be known.
Yeah, there's a few areas, but it is just a little limited. I mean, there's a spot up in Jackson, Trollville, that off to one side of it is like bunch of ice climbs that are, mostly winter routes. There are rock climbs up there too, and so they shouldn't be touched. But there are a couple of other like really steep overhanging crags that would sort of overlap with the Cathedral Cave, but there's also access issues at a few of them. So for that niche, there really just isn't a lot of existing terrain. And Freddie's right, and I would encourage people to go walk in the woods. It's pretty, it's a good pastime. But there are crags out there. There's a handful of them. There isn't a lot of it, and it's good to talk about this at Cathedral. It just so happens that, like, as a mixed climber, that climbing there is awesome, but we get a problem, and so it's gotta change. So going forward, one of the locals is trying to develop a crag in town that's just kind of overhanging dry tooling, putting up new routes, first ascents that are mixed route. So it's going there. There just isn't a whole lot of it. Relative to more popular cliffs like Cannon or whatever. So
all right, thanks, Bayard. I'm gonna move us. We're coming right up against our allotted time that we set aside for the evening. One of the things we wanted to do in wrapping up with this evening, this is being recorded, and one of the beauties of this Zoom recording, it doesn't only record our conversations verbally, it captures all the chat. So one of the things we wanted to do was ask everybody that's been listening here tonight to put in the chat, next 5 minutes, next 2 or 3 minutes, What are you walking away with tonight, thinking about? What is sticking with you from this conversation? I think if you can share those thoughts, I mean, I think those will help greatly as Friends of the Ledges and, you know, the community works around kind of moving to what the next part of the conversation is. So I want to take 3-4 minutes in the chat. Just type in, what are you walking away thinking about tonight? And what is sticking with you from this conversation? And we'll just stand here quietly for a few minutes while people do that.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Dana. Nice to see you, Bruce. Thanks for coming. Mike, if you're talking, you're on mute.
Thanks. Yeah, I just caught that. So keep those comments coming in. I'm just going to do a little slow recap here while people are continuing to put their ideas out there. First off, I just want to thank all the panelists that took the time this evening to come out, join us for this conversation. Few folks juggling kids, more than a few folks, and making time to be a part of this conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time to give thoughtful and really informed perspectives on this topic. And I think I just want to point out that I think at some, there was maybe some concern going into this. This might be a little bit more of a contentious conversation. I think the fact that we had a very respectful conversation is something to note and appreciate. And it shows the strength of our community. And it's something that's really great. I mean, from a personal perspective, one of the things I cherish about living here, we all kind of were able to hash these things out, have opposing opinions, but at the end of the day, respectfully kind of share our thoughts. So well done, everybody. I think some key takeaways for me as I listened to the conversation related a lot to mentorship and that kind of continuing to communicate. And I think, and being maybe taking some extra effort on the part of seasoned local climbers kind of come out of their shell, which can be a challenge, to engage with new climbers that are interested in exploring the mixed climbing at our cliffs, and really maybe take a little time to take that mentorship role seriously, which I think is important to acknowledge, though, at the same time that request is a request of time. And as anybody that gets older knows, a lot of times, it seems like time tends to slip away as we have more and more responsibilities. So I think it's fair to just have that in your minds as we kind of work through this, that it's not necessarily maybe a lack of interest, sometimes it's just a lack of ability, but it's also important to, if we think this is an important topic, to make the time to try to help people kind of learn both accepted practices and maybe help them direct their energy into places where there's maybe a bit, there's less concern related to the impact of using tools on rock. I want to offer up an opportunity for any of the panelists that have been part of this conversation tonight to provide any parting thoughts if you have them. I think you all have presented really great perspectives, but if you have anything to share before we leave, I'd love to give you that opportunity. All right.
Everyone for coming.
Just a shout out to
We lost you, Janet.
just thank you.
Thank you, Janet. Good, Sarah. Sarah, did you have something you wanted to interject?
No,
Sorry.
I was just gonna say thanks. We'll send out, I can't promise a super timely report, but we will post one, and thank you all for being here. And that I will say the comment form, that anonymous comment form that we had for the original sort of statement that started off, we're gonna keep it open. We get alerts anytime anyone posts to that. So just, if you're thinking about these topics after tonight, send a line, because we're going to keep incorporating those ideas. And anyway, yeah, it's great to see you all. We hope to see you in person at the Crags soon. So good night, everyone.
Night all. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Have a good night.